The dog cried at his owner's grave, until one act moved everyone. Jennifer Wilson never imagined an animal could show such human grief until she saw that golden retriever lying on the grave for 3 straight days. The dog whimpered softly, as if talking to someone no longer there, and stubbornly refused to leave the municipal cemetery in Sacramento. "Doc, you gotta do something about this animal," said the cemetery caretaker, Walter, when Jennifer arrived on Tuesday morning. "He won't eat, won't drink, just keeps lying there whimpering. People visiting their loved ones are getting upset." Jennifer watched the golden dog from a distance. As a vet for 15 years, she'd seen many grieving animals, but none as intense as this. The dog looked visibly thinner, his usually bright eyes now dull with sorrow. "Do you know who he belonged to?" she asked, stepping closer cautiously. "He was George Thompson's, lived alone over in the factory district. Neighbors said he had a heart attack early Sunday morning. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late." Jennifer's heart ached. She knew that feeling of loss all too well. 3 years ago, when she lost her husband in a car accident, she'd felt a pain similar to what she now saw in the golden retriever's eyes. "What's his name?" "Duke. The neighbors said George called him Duke." Jennifer knelt beside the dog, slowly extending her hand. Duke lifted his head, looking at her with a mix of hope and wariness, but didn't move. "Hi, Duke. I'm Jennifer. I know you're hurting, sweetheart." The dog stared at her for a few seconds before resting his head back on the small pillow someone had placed there. Jennifer noticed it was an old pillow with a blue and white checkered pattern, probably something that belonged to his late owner. "Who brought this pillow?" she asked the caretaker. "A lady who lived on the same street as George. Margaret, I think. She said it was his favorite, from the chair where he watched TV. Thought it might comfort Duke." Dear listener, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. Jennifer felt a pang in her chest. The story was stirring up her own wounds. She too had kept her husband's belongings, hoping they'd bring comfort in moments of deep longing. "Walter, I'll try to convince him. Can you come with me? I can't let him stay here until something worse happens. Good luck, Doc, we've tried everything. Even brought fresh food, but he won't touch it." Jennifer gently ran her hand over Duke's golden fur. The dog was cold, a sign his body temperature had dropped from lack of food and emotional stress. "Duke, you need to leave here. Your owner wouldn't want to see you like this, suffering so much." The dog looked at her again, this time more intently. Jennifer noticed a slight wag in his tail, almost imperceptible, but enough to show he was processing her words. "I'll come back tomorrow, okay? And I'll bring some things that might help." As she left the cemetery, Jennifer felt heavy. Duke's situation was affecting her more than she wanted to admit. Maybe because she saw in him a reflection of her own struggle to move on after losing her husband. For the rest of the day, while treating other patients at her veterinary clinic downtown, Jennifer couldn't get Duke out of her mind. Between appointments, she searched online for similar cases and ways to help pets experiencing deep grief. When she got home that night, in her quiet apartment in the Hillside Gardens neighborhood, Jennifer found herself staring at the photo of her husband on the living room shelf. Robert was smiling in that picture, taken during a trip they'd made to the California coast 2 months before the accident. "What would you do in my place, Bobby?" she murmured to the photo. It was a habit she'd developed in the first months after her loss. Talking to Robert helped her make tough decisions, even though she knew the answers came from her own intuition. The next morning, Jennifer prepared a special kit for Duke. She packed high-quality dog food, water, some treats that usually worked well with stressed dogs, and a soft blanket. She also brought a bottle of natural calming drops she'd prepared at her clinic. When she arrived at the cemetery around 8 in the morning, she was met with a surprising scene. An elderly woman with grey hair was sitting on the bench near the grave, watching Duke intently. "Good morning," Jennifer greeted as she approached. "Good morning, dear. You must be the vet Walter mentioned yesterday. I'm Margaret Johnson, George Thompson's neighbor." Mrs. Johnson looked to be about 70, wearing a navy blue floral dress and carrying a crocheted purse. Despite her age, her eyes sparkled with a liveliness that caught Jennifer's attention. "Nice to meet you. Mrs. Johnson, I'm Jennifer Wilson. I came to try and help Duke. Poor thing. He's been like this since Sunday. George and he were inseparable, you know. They lived together for 8 years. When George adopted Duke, he was just a little abandoned puppy left at his doorstep." Jennifer knelt beside the dog again. Duke recognized her, and this time allowed her to touch his head without resistance. "Mrs. Johnson, did you know Mr. Thompson well?" "I did. We'd been neighbors for over 20 years. George was a very private man after his wife passed, but he was so loving with Duke. He always said the dog was the only family he had left." This made Jennifer pause. Duke wasn't just a pet to George. He was his companion, his family. Their bond went far beyond a simple owner-pet relationship. Did Mr. Thompson have any other family? He had a son, Michael, but they'd been estranged for over 5 years. Money issues, you know, those silly things that tear families apart. George suffered a lot because of it. He always said he wanted to reconcile with his son before it was too late. Jennifer felt a pang in her chest. The story was even sadder than she'd imagined. Did his son come to the funeral? He did, but he kept his distance. Didn't even come close. I saw him watching from afar during the ceremony, but he left without speaking to anyone. As they talked, Jennifer offered Duke water from a special container she'd brought. To her surprise, the dog sniffed the water and took a few sips, the first sign he was willing to accept help. "That's a good sign," she said, feeling genuine relief. "Mrs. Wilson, may I ask you something? Do you have experience with cases like this?" "I do, Mrs. Johnson. I've treated several grieving animals, but I admit none as deeply affected as Duke. Usually we can turn things around in a few days, but he's already been here for 4. "And what happens if he doesn't get better?" Jennifer hesitated before answering. The truth was, animals in severe grief could develop serious depression, stop eating entirely, and end up with critical health complications. "We'll do everything to prevent that. Duke is a strong dog, and I can tell he still has the will to live. He just needs time and the right kind of help." Mrs. Johnson smiled, but Jennifer noticed worry in her eyes. "You know, Doctor, I've been thinking, what if we brought some of George's things here? Maybe that would help Duke process the situation better." "What kind of things?" "Clothes with his scent. Maybe that old armchair where they always sat together watching TV. I know it sounds strange, but no, it doesn't sound strange at all, Mrs. Johnson. In fact, it might be an excellent idea. A dog's sense of smell is very important in the grieving process. Objects with the owner's scent can either help or prolong the suffering, depending on how it's done. Do you think it's worth trying?" "I think so, but we'd need the family's permission to go through Mr. Thompson's things." Mrs. Johnson grew thoughtful for a moment. "The problem is no one knows how to reach Michael. George never mentioned his son's address, and at the funeral he didn't leave any contact information." Jennifer realized the situation was getting complicated. Without the family's permission, accessing George's belongings would be difficult. And Duke kept wasting away with each passing day. "Mrs. Johnson, is Mr. Thompson's house locked up?" "Yes. The city sealed it yesterday since no family came forward to claim responsibility. They said they'd wait 30 days to see if anyone steps forward." This news left Jennifer frustrated. It felt like every door was closing to help Duke. What about the neighbors? Does anyone have any information about his son? Few people knew Michael. He stopped visiting his father years ago. I know he worked with something related to computers, but I don't know where. Jennifer spent the rest of the morning at the cemetery, trying different approaches to earn Duke's trust. She got him to drink more water and even eat some treats, but the dog stubbornly refused to leave the grave. At 10:30, a woman Jennifer didn't know arrived. She was younger than Mrs. Johnson, around 50, and carried a bouquet of white flowers. "Sorry to disturb," the woman said as she approached. "I'm Martha. I was also Mr. Thompson's neighbor. I came to leave these flowers for him." Mrs. Johnson made the introductions, and Jennifer took the chance to ask if Martha had any information about George's son. "Well, I don't know Michael personally, but I do know he lives right here in Sacramento. Once I overheard George saying his son worked at a tech company in the tech park." It was the first concrete lead they had. The tech park in Sacramento housed several companies in the field, but it would still be like finding a needle in a haystack. Did he mention the company's name? Jennifer asked hopefully. Not that I recall, but I know it was a big company because George always said his son made good money, that he had a comfortable life. After Martha left, Jennifer and Mrs. Johnson discussed their next steps. Duke seemed calmer in their presence, but still refused to leave the grave. "Doctor, what if I stayed here with him for a few hours? Maybe he'd feel less alone." "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Johnson, but I don't want you to overexert yourself. How old are you?" 72, but I still have plenty of energy. And honestly, since my husband passed last year, I've had a lot of free time. Jennifer felt an immediate connection with Mrs. Johnson. Both knew the pain of loss, and maybe together they could help Duke overcome it too. "All right, how about we take shifts? I'll come back in the evening and you stay with him until then?" "Perfect. I'll bring a chair from home and some books. I've always loved reading outdoors." When Jennifer returned to her clinic, she couldn't focus properly on her other patients. Duke's situation was affecting her in a deeply personal way. During lunch, she decided to make some calls to companies at the tech park, hoping to find a Michael Thompson. The first 3 attempts were unsuccessful. On the 4th call to a company called TechWorks, the receptionist said yes, there was a Michael Thompson working there, but he was in a meeting and would only return calls by the end of the day. Jennifer felt her heart race. Finally, a real lead. She left her number and a message explaining it was an urgent matter related to his father. At 5 in the afternoon, when she returned to the cemetery, she found Mrs. Margaret sitting in a plastic chair beside the grave, reading a book to Duke. The dog was lying on the cushion but seemed more relaxed. "How has he been?" Jennifer asked. "Much better. He drank water 3 times and ate a little of the food you brought. And look, when I started reading this book of poems aloud, he lifted his head and paid attention." "Really? How interesting." "Maybe Mr. George used to talk to him a lot." "Oh yes, I always saw the 2 of them on the porch, George telling Duke about his day as if he understood every word." Jennifer knelt beside the dog and noticed he did seem less lethargic. When she said his name, Duke wagged his tail slightly and looked her in the eyes. "Duke, you're getting better, aren't you, sweetheart?" At that moment, Jennifer's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Good afternoon. This is Michael Thompson. I got a message saying it was about my father. Did something happen?" Jennifer felt a mix of relief and nervousness. She'd finally reached George's son. "Mr. Thompson, thank you so much for calling back. I'm Jennifer Wilson, a veterinarian. I'm calling about Duke, your father's dog." There was silence on the other end. "Duke, what's wrong with him?" "Mr. Thompson, are you aware that your father, that he passed away last Sunday?" At least another silence, longer this time. "I am. I was at the funeral, but from a distance. We didn't have a good relationship these last few years." Jennifer heard the pain in his voice, but pressed on. "Duke has been at the cemetery since Sunday, refusing to leave your father's grave. He hasn't been eating properly, and I'm worried about his health." "Oh no, I didn't know. I thought someone was taking care of him after what happened." "Unfortunately, no. And now I need your permission to try some strategies that might help him cope with his grief." "What kind of strategies?" "Maybe bringing some of your father's personal belongings, things with his scent, to help Duke process the loss in a healthier way." Michael took a while to respond. "Doctor, I'll be honest with you. My father and I had a terrible fight 5 years ago. It was an awful argument about money, about inheritance, things that seem so silly now. After that, we barely spoke." "I understand, Mr. Thompson, but now it's about saving an animal who loved your father very much. Duke was always special to him. I remember when Dad adopted him right after my mom died. He said he needed company, that the house was too quiet." Jennifer heard emotion in Michael's voice and decided to be more direct. "Mr. Thompson, Duke is wasting away. If we can't reverse this severe grief, he could face serious complications. I need your permission to enter your father's house and get some things that might help. The house is sealed by the city. I'll have to settle the inheritance first, and that could take weeks." Jennifer felt discouragement set in. It was exactly what she'd feared. Is there any other way? A neighbor who might have keys, or not that I know of. My father became very private after our fight, stopped trusting people. That's when Mrs. Margaret, who had been listening to Jennifer's conversation, signaled that she wanted to speak to Michael. Mr. Michael, this is Margaret Johnson. I was your father's neighbor. May I say something? Jennifer put the phone on speaker. Of course, Mrs. Margaret. Son, your father never stopped talking about you. Even after the fight, he always told me how much he missed you, that he wanted to reconcile but didn't know how to take the first step. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He really said that? Yes, many times. Especially in the last few months. He always said he was proud of the man you'd become, despite all the hurt between you. Jennifer heard Michael's emotional sigh. Mrs. Margaret, do you think he forgave me? I'm certain he did, son. Your father had a big heart. The fight hurt him deeply, but his love for you never faded. When the call ended 15 minutes later, Michael had promised to visit the cemetery the next day to see Duke's situation for himself. He also said he'd try to speed up the legal process to gain access to his father's house. Jennifer felt more hopeful. Maybe with his son involved, they could find a solution for Duke. That night, she went home thinking about the conversation between Mrs. Margaret and Michael. The way the older woman had reconnected father and son, even after the father's passing, was deeply touching. Before bed, Jennifer looked again at her husband's photo. Bobby, I think I'm learning something important from all this. Sometimes, we hold on to grudges with the people we love and only realize our mistake when it's too late. The next morning, a Thursday, Jennifer arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual. Duke was awake, drinking water from the bowl she'd left the day before. It was an encouraging sign. Good morning, my friend. How was your night? Duke looked at her and, to her surprise, stood up for the first time since she'd met him. He took a few tentative steps toward her, but stayed close to the grave. That's right, Duke, you're getting better. Mrs. Margaret arrived a few minutes later, carrying a small backpack. I brought breakfast for us and some special things for Duke, she said, smiling. What special things? I spoke to some neighbors. Last night, Mrs. Marlene, who lives across from George's house, lent me a few photos of him with Duke. I thought they might help somehow. Mrs. Margaret showed 3 photographs. In one, George and Duke were on the porch, the man sitting in a rocking chair with the dog lying at his feet. In the second, they were in the backyard playing with a ball. In the third, they were on the living room couch watching TV together. They're beautiful, Jennifer said, moved. You can see the love between them. When they showed the photos to Duke, the dog sniffed them for a long time and whimpered softly, as if recognizing his owner in the images. You miss him, don't you, Duke? Mrs. Margaret said, stroking the dog's head. Around 10 o'clock, a man in his 40s approached the grave. He was tall, with dark hair, wearing glasses and a suit. Jennifer immediately realized it must be Michael. Mr. Michael? She asked, standing up. Yes. Are you Dr. Jennifer? I am, and this is Mrs. Margaret, whom I mentioned yesterday. Michael greeted both women, but his eyes were fixed on Duke. The dog watched him curiously, as if trying to remember him. Wow, he's so thin, Michael remarked, stepping closer. Duke, do you remember Michael? Jennifer said softly. The dog sniffed the air in Michael's direction and surprisingly took a few steps toward him. It wasn't the excited greeting he'd have given George, but it was recognition. Hi, Duke, said Michael, his voice choked up. It's been a while since we last saw each other, hasn't it? Duke allowed Michael to pet him, but then returned to the cushion near the grave. He's really attached to this place, Michael observed. Yes, he is, and with each passing day it gets harder to take him away from here, replied Jennifer. Michael stood quietly for a few minutes, watching Duke. Then he turned to his father's grave. Hi, Dad. I should have come sooner. I should have talked to you before it was too late. Mrs. Margaret and Jennifer discreetly stepped away, giving him privacy for the moment. I'm sorry for being so stubborn, for holding on to resentment for so long. Mrs. Margaret told me you talked about me, that you wanted to reconcile. I wanted that, too, Dad. I just didn't know how. Duke moved closer to Michael and lay down beside him, as if understanding the importance of the moment. And now look at Duke, Dad. He's suffering just as much as I am. The difference is, he had the courage to stay here, to show the love he had for you. I didn't have that courage when you were alive. Jennifer felt her eyes welling up with tears. The scene was deeply moving. After nearly an hour at the cemetery, Michael promised to speed up the legal process to gain access to his father's house. He also said he would start visiting Duke daily, hoping to build a bond that might help the dog recover. Doctor, how much longer can Duke stay like this before it's too late to save him? It's hard to say, Mr. Michael. Dogs can fall into deep depression and develop serious problems quickly. But Duke is showing some signs of improvement, especially today with your presence. I'll do everything I can to settle the house issue. This week, maybe if Duke can return to a familiar environment, he'll feel better. That was exactly what Jennifer hoped for. Duke needed a place that brought positive memories of his owner, not just the pain of loss. That afternoon, while tending to other patients, Jennifer couldn't stop thinking about the scene between Michael and his father at the cemetery. Even though George was no longer physically present, an important reconciliation had taken place. When she returned to the cemetery at the end of the day, she was surprised. Duke was no longer on his cushion. He was slowly walking among the nearby graves, sniffing the ground. Mrs. Margaret sat on a bench watching. He started moving on his own about an hour ago, she explained. I think Michael's visit did him good. That's wonderful, Jennifer said, relieved. It's the first real sign he's willing to explore his surroundings again. Duke approached them when he heard Jennifer's voice. This time, he let her pet him longer and even showed some interest when she offered him a special treat. You? No, Doctor. I've been watching Duke all these days and I've noticed something. He's not just grieving, he's confused, as if he doesn't understand why George just disappeared from his life. Mrs. Margaret's observation made perfect sense to Jennifer. Unlike humans, dogs don't have the cognitive ability to understand the finality of life. To Duke, George had simply vanished without explanation. You may be right, Mrs. Margaret. Maybe Duke is waiting for George to come back, and that's why he doesn't want to leave here. Exactly, and that's why it might be so important for him to have contact with George's things, to understand that even though George won't return, the love between them hasn't disappeared. That night, Jennifer researched online about therapy techniques for grieving animals. She found several methods that could help, including gradually exposing Duke to his late owner's belongings and establishing new positive routines. On Friday morning, Michael called with good news. Dr. Jennifer, I managed to speed up the process. I'll have access to my father's house this afternoon. Can I grab some things to bring to Duke? Of course, that's wonderful news. I suggest taking his collar and leash, some favorite toys, maybe a piece of your father's clothing that carries his scent, and if possible, that armchair Mrs. Margaret mentioned. The armchair will be hard to transport, but I can take the cushion from it. There's also his food bowl. It was always in the kitchen. Perfect. The more familiar objects, the better. When Jennifer arrived at the cemetery that morning, Duke was standing up drinking water. It was the second significant improvement in 2 consecutive days. Good morning, champ. How are you feeling today? Duke wagged his tail slightly and moved closer to her. For the first time, he allowed Jennifer to examine him more thoroughly. He was dehydrated, but not critically. He had lost weight, but not as much as she had initially feared. Mrs. Margaret, I think Duke is responding well to the increased social interaction. Your presence and Michael's are making a difference. I think so too. This morning when I arrived, he was walking to the cemetery gate and back, almost like he was testing whether he had the courage to leave. That was an excellent sign. Duke was starting to consider the possibility of leaving the cemetery, even if he didn't yet have the full courage to do so. Around noon, Jennifer's phone rang. It was Michael, his voice emotional. Doctor, I'm at my father's house now. It's harder than I imagined being here. I can imagine, Mr. Michael. But remember, you're doing this to help Duke. Yes, I'm trying to focus on that. I found several things that might be useful. Duke's bowl, some toys, a new collar that was stored in the closet. And I also found a letter. A letter. A letter my father wrote to me. It was on the kitchen table inside an envelope with my name on it. Jennifer stayed silent, sensing the importance of that moment for Michael. He must have written it just before what happened. In the letter, he apologizes for our fight, says he loves me and hopes I'll take good care of Duke if anything happens to him. My goodness, Mr. Michael, what an incredible coincidence. I don't know if it's a coincidence, Doctor. Maybe my father sensed something. The letter is dated Saturday, one day before his heart attack. Jennifer felt a chill. It was as if George had left specific instructions for his son to care for Duke. What else does the letter say? It talks about regrets, about how much he valued our family despite the fight. And there's a specific part about Duke, saying he's a special dog, the best companion he could have had these past years. When Michael arrived at the cemetery 2 hours later, he carried a box with Duke's belongings and some of George's things. Duke recognized him immediately and approached the box, sniffing with interest. "Duke, I brought some of your things," Michael said, opening the box. The first item he pulled out was Duke's food bowl. The dog recognized it instantly and licked the rim, where traces of kibble scent still lingered. Next, Michael showed a worn-out old stuffed bear. "I remember this toy. Dad told me you got it when you were still a puppy." Duke gently took the bear in his mouth and carried it back near the grave. It was clear that object held special meaning for him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next item was a flannel plaid shirt, clearly worn and carrying George's scent. When Duke sniffed it, he whimpered softly and lay down on top of it. "This was Dad's favorite shirt to wear at home," explained Michael, moved. Jennifer watched Duke's reactions closely. Contact with familiar objects was triggering an intense emotional response, but it seemed positive. The last item in the box was a cushion from George's armchair, still covered in Duke's fur. "This cushion was on the chair where you two watched TV together every night," said Michael, placing it on the floor. Duke approached the cushion and, for the first time since Sunday, lay down in a relaxed position, no longer the tense, watchful posture he'd maintained at the grave. "This is wonderful," said Jennifer. "Duke is starting to associate positive objects with the memory of his father, rather than focusing only on the pain of loss." At that moment, something unexpected happened. Duke got up from the cushion, walked over to Michael, and rested his head against his leg, seeking affection. "Wow," murmured Michael, petting Duke. "I think he's starting to accept me as part of the family." "That's exactly what's happening," confirmed Jennifer. "Duke is transferring some of the bond he had with your father to you. It's a natural and very healthy process." Mrs. Johnson, who had been watching tearfully, remarked, "Your father would be so happy to see this, Michael. He always said he wanted you two to be a family again." For the rest of the afternoon, Duke showed more signs of improvement. He ate a reasonable amount of food, drank plenty of water, and even played a little with his stuffed bear. However, as evening fell, he returned near the grave, still not entirely convinced it was safe to leave. "This back and forth is normal," Jennifer explained to Michael. "Duke is processing a lot of different emotions. It'll take time before he feels secure enough to leave this place for good." "Doctor, how long could this process take?" "It varies. A lot from animal to animal. It could be days or weeks. The important thing is that he's making progress." Michael decided to spend the night at the cemetery with Duke. He brought a chair and a blanket, determined to keep the dog company. "I'm sure this will be good for him," said Jennifer, admiring Michael's dedication. On Saturday morning, Jennifer arrived at the cemetery, eager to see how Duke had spent the night. She was deeply moved by the scene she found. Michael was asleep in the chair with Duke lying at his feet, finally away from the grave. Mrs. Johnson was already there, watching with a smile. "They've been like this since 5 in the morning," she whispered. Duke left the grave and went to lie beside Michael. It was the sign Jennifer had been waiting for. Duke was finally beginning to form new bonds and accept that life could go on without George. When Michael woke up, he found Duke awake too, but calm and relaxed. "Good morning, Duke. How'd you sleep?" The dog wagged his tail and licked Michael's hand, showing affection. I think we can try taking him for a short walk outside the cemetery, Jennifer suggested. Michael put the leash on Duke, who resisted at first but then allowed it. As they started walking toward the gate, Duke hesitated several times, looking back toward the grave. Easy, Duke. We're not abandoning Dad's memory. We're just going for a little walk, Michael said gently. With a lot of patience, they managed to get Duke onto the sidewalk outside the cemetery. The dog was clearly nervous, but didn't try to run back. Let's just go to the corner and come back, said Jennifer. The walk was slow with several stops, but Duke made it. When they returned to the cemetery, he ran straight to the grave, but this time he didn't lie down on it. He simply sniffed the headstone and then came back to Michael's side. It was great progress, Jennifer observed. Duke is learning that he can leave this place and still maintain a connection with his father. Over the weekend, Michael established a routine with Duke. They spent mornings at the cemetery, went for walks in the afternoon, and returned for one last visit to the grave before leaving. On Monday, Jennifer suggested the next step. I think Duke is ready to see the house where he'll live now. Michael had decided to take Duke to his home in Northside Heights, a ground-floor apartment with a small outdoor area. Do you think he'll adjust? My place is very different from his. Dad's house. What matters is that Duke will be with you, and you now represent safety and family to him, Jennifer explained. The move to Michael's home was gradual. First, they took Duke just to explore the place, letting him sniff around and get familiar with the new scents. On the first day, Duke was clearly uncomfortable. He searched every room for George and refused to eat. That reaction is normal, Jennifer reassured. Duke is going through another big transition. Michael brought all of Duke's familiar belongings to the new house. The chair cushion, the stuffed bear, the food bowl, and especially George's flannel shirt. Gradually, Duke began to adjust. Michael's constant presence and the familiar items helped him understand that this new place could also be a home. By the end of the first week in the new house, Duke was eating normally and exploring the backyard. He still had moments of sadness, especially in the evenings when he used to watch TV with George, but he was visibly better. Dr. Duke has improved so much. He even plays again, Michael reported during a follow-up visit. That's wonderful. And how are you adjusting to having a dog? Honestly, it's been better than I expected. Duke has given me companionship I didn't realize I needed, and somehow taking care of him makes me feel closer to my dad. Jennifer smiled. This was exactly the kind of outcome she had hoped, for a mutual healing where both Duke and Michael found comfort in each other. However, not everything was resolved. Duke still insisted on visiting the cemetery regularly. Every morning when Michael got ready for work, Duke would go to the door and whine, asking to go to the cemetery. He still needs that connection. To the place where he said goodbye to his father, Jennifer explained. It's important we respect that process. So Michael established a new routine. Before work, he'd take Duke to the cemetery for a 15-minute visit. Duke would sniff the grave, stand there quietly for a few moments, and then leave without resistance. It's like he's telling his dad about his day, Michael noted. This routine continued for several weeks, with Duke gradually spending less time at the grave each visit. Jennifer closely monitored his progress, making regular visits to check on Duke's physical and emotional health. The dog had regained his lost weight and returned to his naturally cheerful, friendly demeanor. A month after Duke had fully moved out of the cemetery, Jennifer got an unexpected call from Michael. Doctor, I have to tell you something. Something really special happened yesterday. What was it? Duke stopped asking to go to the cemetery every morning. Yesterday, when I got ready to take him, he just stayed in the living room, lying on his dad's cushion, with no sign of wanting to leave. That's wonderful, Michael. It means Duke has finally processed his loss and is ready to live fully in the present. And there's more. Last night, for the first time since he came to live with me, Duke slept in my bed. Before, he always slept in the living room on top of Daddy's shirt. Jennifer Wilson was moved by the account. It was the definitive sign that Duke had completely transferred his loyalty and love to Michael, keeping George Thompson as a cherished memory, but no longer as a presence that held him back from living. How do you feel about that? Really good. I feel like we finally have our own relationship, not just one based on my father's memory. Duke chose to love me for who I am, not just because I'm George's son. 3 months after the start of this whole story, Jennifer went to visit Michael and Duke at home. She found the two of them playing in the backyard, Duke chasing a ball while Michael laughed at his clumsy attempts to catch it. "How are things going here?" Jennifer asked. "Wonderful. Duke's completely settled in. He eats well, plays, socializes with other dogs when we go for walks. And look at this." Michael showed a photo on his phone of Duke playing with other dogs at the park. "He's learned to trust the world again," Jennifer observed. "That's what matters most." "Me too, Doctor. Taking care of Duke has taught me so much about forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of showing love while we still have time." Jennifer was touched by Michael's transformation. The man she had met 3 months earlier was weighed down by guilt and regret. Now he radiated peace and contentment. And the visits to the cemetery? "We still go sometimes, but it's different now. It's no longer an obligation or an emotional need, just a loving visit to remember Dad." As Jennifer prepared to leave, Duke brought his stuffed teddy bear and dropped it at her feet, wagging his tail happily. "I think he's offering you his toy," Michael laughed. "It's the highest compliment a dog can give," Jennifer replied, petting Duke. "It means he considers me part of the family." Leaving Michael's house that day, Jennifer reflected on the journey they had all taken together. Duke hadn't just overcome his grief, he had also been the instrument of reconciliation between father and son, even after George's passing. The following week, Jennifer got another call from Michael, this time with an unexpected proposal. "Doctor, Duke and I were talking," he began playfully. "Talking?" Jennifer laughed. "Yes, we have long conversations about life. And we've decided we'd like to give back for all the help we've received." "How so?" "We'd like to help other animals going through similar situations. Duke could be a sort of therapy dog for grieving animals." The idea intrigued Jennifer. Duke really had developed a special sensitivity to emotional suffering, both in humans and other animals. "That's an interesting idea. How do you see it working?" "Well, Duke could visit other dogs dealing with grief or trauma. His calm, loving presence might help them heal." Jennifer thought about the proposal for a few days. There was scientific basis to believe animals could benefit from companionship during emotional recovery. "Let's try it," she decided, "but we'll need proper protocols and close monitoring." Duke's first case as a therapy dog came 2 weeks later. A beat cat named Mimi had lost her feline companion and refused to eat, much like Duke had. When Duke first visited Mimi, the cat hid at first, but Duke simply lay down near her and waited patiently. After an hour, Mimi cautiously approached and sniffed him. "It's amazing," Mimi's owner remarked. "She hasn't gone near any other animal since Lola passed." Over the course of many visits, Duke helped Mimi overcome her grief. His calm and non-threatening presence provided the emotional support the cat needed to learn to trust the world again. The success with Mimi led to other cases. Soon, Duke was regularly visiting several animals in the process of emotional recovery, always accompanied by Michael and supervised by Jennifer. "It's like Duke understands exactly what these animals are feeling," Michael remarked after a particularly successful visit. "He understands because he went through the same pain," Jennifer explained, "and perhaps even more importantly, he knows it's possible to heal and be happy again." Duke's reputation as a therapy dog spread throughout the region. Veterinarians from other neighborhoods began requesting his visits for complex cases involving traumatized animals. Mrs. Margaret, who had become a constant figure in Michael and Duke's lives, suggested they document these experiences. "You could write a book about Duke and this whole journey," she proposed during a Sunday lunch at Michael's house. "A book?" Michael asked, surprised. "Yes. Your story is inspiring. It shows how love can overcome loss, how second chances are possible, and how animals can teach us about resilience and forgiveness." The idea of the book planted a seed in Michael's mind. He began writing down Duke's experiences as a therapy dog, the success stories, the challenges faced. 6 months after starting this new phase, Michael had compiled enough material for a book. Jennifer helped with the technical and veterinary aspects, while Mrs. Margaret contributed the human and emotional perspective of the story. What do you think the title should be? Michael asked during a meeting to review the manuscript. How about Duke, The Journey from Grief to Love? Jennifer suggested. Or The Dog Who Taught Us to Live Again? Mrs. Margaret offered. I like both, Michael said, but I think the title should reflect not just Duke's journey, but ours too. After all, we all learned and grew in this process. Finally, they settled on the title, Endless Love, How a Dog Taught a Family to Overcome Loss. The book's publication brought a new dimension to Michael's life. He began receiving invitations to speak about pet grief and animal-assisted therapy at veterinary schools and specialized events. Duke accompanied him to these talks, serving as a living example of resilience and healing. His calm and affectionate presence deeply moved the audiences. I never imagined Duke would become a kind of ambassador for emotional healing, Michael told Jennifer after an especially touching presentation. Neither did I. But it makes perfect sense. Duke experienced the most profound transformation possible, from total despair to a full love of life. A year after the whole story began, Jennifer, Michael, Duke, and Mrs. Margaret returned to the cemetery for a special visit. It was the anniversary of George's passing. Duke walked calmly to the grave, sniffed the headstone affectionately, and then lay down beside it, relaxed now, no longer in the tense posture of grief he had shown in the past. Hi, Dad, Michael said, kneeling by the grave. I came to tell you about everything that happened this year. Duke is doing great, really great. He's become a famous therapy dog, helping other animals heal from their pain. Duke looked at Michael and wagged his tail gently as if understanding the conversation. And I'm doing okay too, Dad. I've learned so much about forgiveness, second chances, and showing love while we still have time. Thank you for leaving Duke behind to teach me those lessons. Jennifer watched the scene, deeply moved. Seeing the complete transformation of that entire family, because that's what they were now, a family, was one of the most rewarding experiences of her career. Mrs. Margaret, at 73, had also found a new purpose. She became a regular volunteer at the Animal Therapy Project, helping care for the animals during therapy sessions. You know, Doctor, she said to Jennifer as they watched Michael and Duke, sometimes I think George planned all this from above. How so? He knew Michael needed a second chance to be a son. Duke needed a second chance to love, and even we needed a new purpose in our lives. It's as if George orchestrated this whole story so we could all heal together. Jennifer smiled. Though she wasn't particularly religious, she had to admit there was something special in how every piece of the story had fallen perfectly into place. As they prepared to leave the cemetery that day, Duke did something he'd never done before. He approached George's grave, sniffed the headstone one last time, then walked determinedly toward the exit without looking back. I think Duke is saying goodbye, Michael observed. In what way? Not to the love he had for Dad, but to the need to stay stuck in the past. He's ready to live fully in the present. It was a profound and accurate observation. Duke had completed his healing journey and was ready for the next chapter of his life. In the following months, Duke's therapeutic work expanded. He began visiting not just grieving animals, but also elderly in nursing homes, children in hospitals, and people in emotional recovery. His ability to sense emotional pain and offer comfort was almost mystical. Duke seemed to know instinctively when someone needed his special affection. It's like he's developed a life mission, Jennifer remarked during a routine evaluation. Maybe he has. Maybe the suffering he endured at the cemetery was necessary to awaken this special sensitivity he has now. The book about Duke's story was published a year and a half after the cemetery events. It became a regional success, deeply touching, people dealing with loss and grief. Michael donated part of the book's profits to animal shelters and animal-assisted therapy projects, keeping alive the spirit of generosity Duke had awakened in him. Dad would be proud, he told Jennifer at the book launch. I'm sure he would. You turned a tragedy into a healing force for so many people and animals. 2 years after George's passing, Duke had become a local celebrity. His story was told. In schools, his therapy work recognized by veterinarians across the region, and his loving presence had touched hundreds of lives. But to Michael, Duke remained simply his companion, his best friend, the bridge that reconnected him with his father's love and his own capacity for unconditional love. "You know, Duke," Michael said one quiet night, stroking the sleeping dog beside him, "you saved so much more than your own life when you decided to leave that cemetery. You saved mine too." Duke opened his eyes, looked at Michael with that deep, wise gaze he'd developed, and drifted back to sleep peacefully. They were a healed family, a family that had learned true love transcends even death, transforming into a force of life, hope, and healing for all lucky enough to experience it. 3 years later, during a routine visit to the cemetery, now, just once a year on George's birthday, Jennifer asked a question she'd held onto for a long time. "Michael, have you ever thought about what it would be like if we hadn't managed to save Duke that first day?" Michael looked at Duke, who was playing peacefully among the flowers by the grave, and smiled. "I think about it sometimes, and I realize it wasn't just about saving Duke. It was about saving all of us. Duke was the catalyst we needed to heal each other. And now we're a family born from pain, grown in love and blossoming in hope. Duke taught me it's possible to honor the past without being trapped by it. You can love those who are gone and still be fully present for those who remain." Jennifer looked around. Michael, a man transformed by a dog's unconditional love. Duke, who had found purpose in helping others overcome their pain. Margaret, who had discovered a new family in her late 70s. And herself, who had rediscovered the true meaning of her profession through this experience. It was a story of a happy ending earned through love, patience, and dedication. A story that proved even in the deepest sorrow, there's always a chance for new beginnings and renewal. Duke trotted over to the group, wagging his tail happily, as if he knew they were talking about him. Michael scooped him up, something only he was allowed to do, and hugged him tenderly. "Thank you for everything, my friend, for teaching me about love, forgiveness, and second chances." Duke licked Michael's face, his special way of saying, "You're welcome and I love you too." When they left the cemetery that day, they walked together toward the car, a united and happy family. Duke didn't look back even once. He was completely focused on the present, the future, the life he had built with his new family. It was exactly as it should be. Grief had turned into love, pain had become purpose, and loss had transformed into multiplied gain. The story that began with a dog crying alone over a grave had become a celebration of life, love, and second chances. And Duke, the unwitting hero of this journey, continued spreading love and healing wherever he went, fulfilling a mission he might not even fully understand, but one he carried out with the natural perfection of those who love unconditionally. 5 years after that first meeting in the cemetery, Duke still works as a therapy dog. Michael has become a recognized speaker in the field of pet loss. Margaret, now 78, remains active in the animal-assisted therapy project, and Jennifer has expanded her clinic to include a specialized animal mental health division. All of them were transformed by a story that began with pain and ended with love multiplied. A story that proves even in the hardest circumstances, there's always hope for healing and renewal. Duke remains that special dog who learned to turn his own pain into a source of healing for others. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of his journey. True love doesn't disappear with loss. It transforms into a force that can heal and change everything around it. The plaid cushion that once comforted Duke in his deepest sorrow still sits in Michael's home. But now it serves as a bed for the visiting therapy dogs Duke regularly hosts. It's a symbolic way of continuing to spread the comfort that once saved his own life. And so Duke's story keeps being written every day, through every life he touches, every heart he mends, every family he helps reunite. Because some stories don't end, they multiply, spread, and live on through the love they inspire. The dog who once wept at his owner's grave became a symbol of hope and renewal. Your journey from pain to healing, from grief to love, from despair to life's purpose, continues to inspire all who have the privilege of knowing you. And perhaps that is the true magic of Duke's story, proving that love is stronger than loss, that life always finds a way to go on, and that sometimes the greatest teachers come in unexpected forms, like a golden retriever who chose to turn his pain into a source of healing for the world. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now, let's continue. 10 years had passed since that fateful Sunday when Duke lost his first owner. The golden retriever, now 15 years old, had become a local legend. His therapy visits had helped over 200 animals and countless families through grief and trauma. Michael, now 50, had married a veterinarian named Rachel, whom he met during one of his talks. Rachel fell in love not just with Michael, but with the mission he and Duke had embraced together. Duke was our matchmaker. Michael would joke whenever he told the story of how he met his wife. The couple lived in a larger home in waterfront estates, with a spacious backyard, where Duke could comfortably welcome animals for therapy sessions. The house had become a small center for animal-assisted therapy. Margaret Johnson, now 82, remained a constant presence in the family's life. She had moved to a nearby retirement home, but spent every weekend at Michael and Rachel's, helping care for the visiting animals. "This family gave me a second youth," she'd say, always smiling as she watched Duke interact with the other animals. Jennifer Wilson, who had become not just Duke's vet but a dear friend of the family, now ran an animal behavior clinic serving the entire Central Valley region. One day, during a particularly challenging therapy session, Duke showed signs of exhaustion that worried Michael. "Rachel, I think Duke might be getting too old for therapy work," he remarked that evening. "Maybe it's time for him to retire." Rachel agreed. "He's already done more than any dog could in a lifetime." The decision to retire Duke from therapy work was difficult but necessary. At 15, he deserved to rest and enjoy his golden years in peace. The community he had served for so long organized a heartfelt retirement ceremony. Veterinarians, families he had helped, and even city officials came to honor the dog who had become a symbol of hope for the town. Duke taught our community about resilience, the transformative power of love, and how purpose can be found even in the darkest moments, the mayor said in his speech. Duke, though not fully understanding the ceremony, seemed to know he was being celebrated. He wagged his tail throughout the event and let dozens of people pet and hug him. In retirement, Duke returned to being simply a family dog. He spent his days napping in the backyard sun, occasionally playing with toys, and soaking up all the affection Michael, Rachel, and Margaret could give. "You deserve to rest, my friend," Michael would say every night, stroking Duke before bed. "You've already done your part to make the world a better place." But even in retirement, Duke still showed his special sensitivity. Whenever a traumatized animal visited the house, he would naturally approach and offer quiet comfort. "I don't think he can ever fully retire," Rachel observed. "It's as if helping others has become part of his nature now." 2 years after retirement, when Duke was 17, Jennifer noticed he was slower and sleeping more than usual. "It's natural for his age," she explained to Michael and Rachel. "Duke is getting older, but he's still healthy and happy." The family adjusted their routine to accommodate Duke's needs as a senior dog. They installed ramps for him to go up and down stairs, bought a special orthopedic bed, and tweaked his diet. "We want Duke to have the best quality of life possible," Michael told Jennifer during a checkup, and he does. Duke is a very well cared for and loved senior dog. Few dogs are lucky enough to grow old in such a devoted family. During his final years, Duke still received occasional visits from animals and people he had helped. It was as if there was an invisible web of gratitude surrounding the dog who had touched so many lives. "My goodness, Duke is huge," exclaimed a child who had met Duke years earlier while going through a tough time. "I remember when I was smaller than him." Even with his limited mobility, Duke still showed special interest in children. He let them pet him and play gently with him, keeping his natural therapeutic spirit alive. One Sunday afternoon, nearly 18 years after George's passing, Michael was in the backyard reading a book while Duke rested beside him. It was a picture of perfect domestic peace. "Duke, do you know you completely changed my life?" Michael said, resting his hand on the dog's golden fur. Duke opened his eyes and looked at Michael with that deep, wise gaze he'd developed over the years. Before you, I was lost, full of guilt, regret, anger. You taught me to forgive, to love, to find purpose in pain. Duke wagged his tail slightly, as if understanding every word. And more than that, you taught me that my father's love never disappeared. It just transformed. And now it lives through you, through me, through all the lives we've touched together. Just then, Rachel joined them in the yard, bringing an afternoon snack. "What are you two talking about?" she asked, sitting beside her husband. "About gratitude," Michael replied. "About how a dog can teach a human everything that truly matters in life." Rachel smiled and stroked Duke affectionately. "Duke really is special. I've never seen an animal with so much emotional wisdom." "I think he learned that wisdom through suffering," Michael reflected, "and then chose to use it to help others. It's a lesson we humans should learn." As they spoke, Duke closed his eyes again, but his face remained serene. He was a dog at peace with himself, with his life, with his choices. Margaret arrived for the traditional Sunday lunch, walking more slowly with age, but still wearing her ever-bright smile. "How's our hero today?" she asked, approaching Duke. "Calm and happy," Rachel answered, "as always." "You know," Margaret said, settling into a nearby chair, "sometimes I wonder if George has any idea of all that's happened since he left." "What do you mean?" Michael asked. "Well, he left behind a son and a dog separated by grief, and somehow that pain brought them together and turned them into a healing force for hundreds of others. It's as if his departure planted a seed of love that keeps growing and spreading to this day." Michael was moved by Margaret's observation. "I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Dad may not be here physically, but his love is still alive and active through everything we do. And Duke was the guardian of that love," Rachel added. "He preserved the connection between father and son and turned it into something much greater." Duke, as if sensing they were talking about him, opened his eyes and looked at each person present, wagging his tail slightly. "I think he knows, said Mrs. Margaret. "Duke always knew he was special, that he had an important mission." When fall arrived that year, Duke was 18 and a half. It was an advanced age for a golden retriever, but he still showed moments of joy and liveliness. Jennifer made more frequent visits, closely monitoring the elderly dog's health. "Duke is aging with dignity," she assessed after a full checkup. "He shows no signs of significant pain or discomfort. He's simply following the natural course of life." "How much longer do you think we have with him?" asked Michael, his voice thick with emotion. "It's impossible to say for sure, Michael. It could be months. It could be years. Duke has a very strong will to live. I believe he'll stay with us as long as he feels he still has love to give and receive." This assessment brought some comfort to the family. They focused on making every day with Duke special, full of affection and attention. During winter, Duke developed a preference for staying near the fireplace, lying on his special orthopedic bed. It was his favorite spot to observe the family and receive visitors. "He looks like a wise patriarch," joked Rachel, watching over his family with kindness. "That's exactly what he is," agreed Michael. "The patriarch who keeps our family together." The neighborhood children still visited Duke regularly. They had grown up hearing his stories and considered him something of a local celebrity. "Mr. Duke," said a 7-year-old girl during one visit, "my mom told me you used to be a hero. Is that true?" Duke wagged his tail gently and let the girl pet him, his quiet way of saying yes, he had tried to be a hero in his own way. "He still is a hero," Michael told the child. "Duke teaches us every day about love, patience, and kindness." On a spring afternoon, nearly 19 years after George's passing, something special happened. Duke, who had been sleepier than usual all week, suddenly stood up with renewed energy. "Look at that," said Rachel, surprised. "Duke's so lively today." The dog walked into the backyard and lay down in his favorite spot under the mango tree, where he used to host therapy animals. It was as if he were revisiting special memories. Michael joined him in the yard, sitting on the grass beside the dog. "What are you thinking about, my friend?" Duke looked at Michael with those golden eyes that had seen so much pain and so much healing. There was a deep serenity in that gaze, a kind of inner peace that only comes when someone knows they've fulfilled their life's purpose. "You're proud of the life you've lived, aren't you?" Michael asked, gently stroking Duke's head. The dog wagged his tail slightly and rested his head on Michael's leg, a gesture of affection and trust they had shared thousands of times over the years. "I'm proud of you too, Duke. Proud to have been chosen as your family, to learn from you, to walk beside you on this incredible journey." At that moment, Rachel and Mrs. Margaret joined them in the yard. Instinctively, they formed a circle around Duke, each offering gentle touches and words of love. "Duke, you were the greatest gift life ever gave me," said Mrs. Margaret, her eyes glistening. "You gave me a family when I needed it most, gave me purpose when I felt useless. And you gave me a life companion who taught me about unconditional love," added Rachel. "I'll never forget how you accepted me from day one, how you welcomed me into this special family you all had built." Duke looked at each person around him, as if memorizing their faces, forever cherishing those moments of pure love. "You know, Duke," said Michael, "sometimes I think you knew from the beginning that we had a mission together. When you refused to leave the cemetery, it wasn't just because you were grieving. It was because you knew I needed to find you, that we both needed to heal together." It was a profound reflection, and likely true. Duke had always shown a wisdom beyond normal canine intelligence. It was as if he had an intuitive understanding of purpose and destiny. When night fell, Duke slept soundly in his bed near the fireplace. In the early hours of the morning, his breathing grew softer, more spaced out. Michael, who had been sleeping on the nearby couch to keep Duke company, woke with a sudden sense of foreboding. He approached the dog and realized his breathing had grown very faint. "Rachel," he called softly, "I think the time has come." Rachel woke immediately and joined her husband beside Duke. The dog was conscious but visibly frail. "I'll call Margaret and Jennifer," Rachel said. "No," Michael replied gently. "I think Duke wants it this way, quiet, just with family. That's his way." Duke opened his eyes and looked at Michael and Rachel. There was no fear or discomfort in his gaze, only deep serenity. "It's okay, my friend," Michael murmured, stroking Duke's fur. "You can rest now. You've done everything you came here to do. You've touched hundreds of lives, taught us about love and forgiveness, turned pain into healing." Duke gave a slight wag of his tail, as if he understood and agreed. "And you taught me to be a better son, a better man, a better person," Michael continued, his voice breaking. "You were the bridge that reconnected me with my father's love. And now you'll see him again, won't you?" Duke breathed. Softly, his eyes fixed on Michael with unconditional love. "Thank you for everything, Duke. Thank you for choosing me, for teaching me, for loving me. You were so much more than a dog to me. You were family, a teacher, a friend, an inspiration." Rachel added her own farewell. "Duke, you made our family whole. You taught us that true love knows no species, no limits. You'll always be a part of us." Duke closed his eyes for the last time at 5 in the morning on a sunny spring Friday, surrounded by the love of those he had chosen as family. His expression was one of absolute peace, like someone who knew they had perfectly fulfilled their mission on Earth. Michael stayed by Duke's side for hours, stroking his golden fur and talking to him about all the memories they had shared. "You're with Dad now, aren't you?" he whispered. "So I'm sure he was waiting for you, to thank you for taking such good care of his son." When Jennifer and Margaret arrived, they found Michael still beside Duke, serene despite his grief. "He left in peace," Michael told them, "just as he lived, with dignity, surrounded by love, knowing he had made a difference." Margaret, even at 82, wept openly. "Duke was an angel in dog form," she said. "He came to heal our family and ended up healing so many more." Jennifer, as a veterinarian, had witnessed many farewells between humans and animals, but Duke's passing was special. "He lived an extraordinary life," she said. "Few beings, human or animal, touch so many lives in such a positive way." Duke's funeral was a celebration of life, bringing together hundreds of people and animals whose lives he had touched over the years. The municipal cemetery where it all began was chosen as his final resting place. Duke returns to the place where he found his mission, Michael said during the ceremony. It's fitting that he rests here, near the man who first taught him about unconditional love. Duke's grave was placed close to George's. On the headstone they engraved, "Duke, the dog who taught the world to love again. His mission lives, on in every life he touched." In the days following Duke's passing, Michael found himself processing not just the pain of loss, but also a deep gratitude for the journey they had shared. "I can't stay sad for too long," he told Rachel. "Duke wouldn't have wanted that. He would have wanted us to keep spreading the love he taught us, and that's exactly what they did." Michael and Rachel continued their animal-assisted therapy work, now using Duke's story as inspiration for other dogs and families. Margaret, despite her advanced age, became a kind of guardian of Duke's memory, sharing his story with children in schools and adults in support groups. "Duke taught us that grief isn't the end of the story," she would say. "It's just the beginning of a new way to love." Jennifer expanded her clinic even further, creating a program called the Duke Project that offered free support for grieving pets and families. 6 months after Duke's passing, Michael received an unexpected call. It was a journalist from São Paulo who had heard about Duke's story and wanted to write an article for a national magazine. "Mr. Michael, Duke's story is extraordinary. We'd love to share it with a wider audience." At first hesitant, Michael eventually agreed, realizing it was an opportunity to multiply Duke's legacy. The article was published 3 months later and made a huge impact. Soon, Michael was receiving calls from all over the country, from people who wanted to hear more about Duke and learn about animal-assisted therapy. "Duke keeps touching lives even after he's gone," Rachel observed. Now, through his inspiring story, Michael decided to write a second book, this time focusing specifically on Duke's later years and the lessons he had learned about aging, farewell, and legacy. "Duke taught me that a life well lived isn't measured in length, but in impact," he wrote in the introduction of the new book. "He lived 19 years, but his legacy will last forever." The new book, titled Duke's Final Lesson on Life, Love, and Legacy, became even more popular than the first. Michael's words deeply moved people going through loss and grief. A year after Duke's passing, the family decided to do something special to honor his memory. They created the Duke Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to animal-assisted therapy and support for grieving families. "Duke always wanted to help others," Michael said during the inauguration ceremony. Now he can keep doing that through organized, systematic work. The Duke Foundation started small, serving only the Sacramento area, but quickly expanded to other cities in the Central Valley. Margaret, despite her age, insisted on being an active volunteer for the foundation. "Duke gave me a family and a purpose," she said. "As long as I have strength, I'll honor his memory by helping others." 2 years after the foundation's creation, they had already helped over 1,000 families and trained hundreds of dogs for therapy work. Jennifer became the foundation's technical director, ensuring all procedures were based on solid scientific evidence. "What began with one grieving dog has turned into a revolution in how we see animal-assisted therapy," she said during a scientific conference. The Duke Foundation's work caught the attention of universities and researchers nationwide. Studies were conducted documenting the effectiveness of the methods developed from their experience with Duke. "Duke didn't just heal individual lives," concluded one of the studies. "He also contributed to the advancement of behavioral veterinary science in Brazil." 3 years after Duke's passing, Michael and Rachel made an important decision: to adopt another dog. Not to replace Duke, Michael explained, but to honor his memory by giving another animal the chance to have a loving family. The chosen dog was a 3-year-old golden retriever named Bailey, who had been abandoned and was at the municipal shelter. "It's as if Duke sent Bailey to us," Rachel said when they first saw the dog. Bailey had a completely different personality from Duke, more playful, more energetic, less introspective. But there was a natural sweetness in him that reminded them of Duke. "Every dog is unique," Michael told Mrs. Johnson. "I don't expect Bailey to be like Duke. I just hope he's happy and loved." Bailey quickly adapted to the family and the routine at the Duke Foundation. Though he didn't have Duke's natural therapeutic sensitivity, he showed a knack for working with children. Bailey has his own mission, Jennifer observed, different from Duke's, but just as important. 5 years after Duke's passing, the foundation bearing his name had become a national leader in animal-assisted therapy. Hundreds of professionals had been trained using methods developed from the experience with Duke. Michael, now a recognized expert in the field, received invitations to speak at national and international conferences. "Everything I know, I learned from Duke," he would say whenever introduced as an expert. "He was my most important teacher." Mrs. Johnson, now 87, was still an active volunteer, though her activities were adjusted for her age. "Duke gave me nearly 20 extra years of meaningful life," she said. "Every day working at the Foundation is a gift from him." One Sunday afternoon, exactly 5 years after Duke's passing, the family visited his grave at the municipal cemetery. "Hi, Duke," Michael said, kneeling before the headstone. "I came to share the news with you." Bailey, who had accompanied them, curiously sniffed the grave, as if trying to understand who this special dog he'd heard so much about was. "The Foundation is doing great. We've helped thousands of families, trained hundreds of therapy dogs, all based on what you taught us." Rachel joined her husband. "And Bailey is thriving. He has his own personality, his own way of helping. I think you'd approve." Mrs. Johnson, despite her limited mobility, insisted on joining the visit. "Duke, my dear, you're still changing lives every day. Through the foundation, through the people we've trained, through your story that keeps inspiring others." As they prepared to leave, something touching happened. Bailey approached Duke's grave, sniffed the headstone, and then lay down beside it, just as Duke used to do years ago at George Thompson's grave. "Look at that," Rachel murmured, moved. "It's like Bailey understands the importance of this place." "Maybe Duke told him," Michael joked, though there was sincerity in his voice. They stayed a few minutes longer, watching Bailey pay his silent tribute to the dog he'd never met, but whose legacy had shaped the family that was now his, too. When they finally left the cemetery that day, everyone felt a special connection had been made, between past and present, between Duke and Bailey, between the story that had ended and the new one just beginning. "Duke would be proud," Mrs. Johnson said on the way back, "seeing how his legacy lives on and grows." "I think he always knew it would," Michael replied. "Duke was always wiser than all of us." And so, the story that began with a dog mourning at his owner's grave had transformed into a force for change that continued to spread across the world, touching new lives, creating new families, and offering hope to those who needed it most. Duke had passed on, but his love remained alive, multiplied, eternalized through every life still being moved by his extraordinary tale of resilience, love, and devotion to others. The dog who once refused to leave a gravesite had become immortal, through the legacy of love he left behind. And perhaps that is the true measure of a life well lived, not the years we endure, but the love we leave behind to keep living through those we've touched. Duke's story is still being told, still inspiring, still healing, because some stories transcend the lives of their protagonists and become universal, timeless, capable of touching hearts across generations. And Duke, wherever he may be now, surely continues to spread love, just as he did throughout his extraordinary life on Earth. His mission never ended. It simply expanded into dimensions even his great canine wisdom could never have imagined. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of Duke's story and where you're watching from. Do you think Duke fulfilled his life's purpose? Share your heartfelt thoughts about this moving journey in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.